Hi, everyone. This is Raquel.
Hi, and this is Jennifer.
Welcome to Madness Cafe.
This is a feminist podcast where we talk about women's issues, politics, and health and wellness.
And where those issues intersect. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Jennifer and I have a special guest with us today. Her name is Jess Jackson, and she is a serial entrepreneur and centers her work on the visibility and inclusion of marginalized bodies. She is COO and co-founder of Loud.social, a content marketing agency that focuses their work on justice-oriented cannabis, sustainability, and wellness-focused brands. She is also co-founder of Copperhouse Detroit, which is Detroit's first cannabis-positive AirBnB. Since opening their doors, Jess and her wife, Cara, have hosted 300 plus individuals and brands in their home, and Copperhouse Detroit has become a pillar and springboard within the cannabis community. Jess has launched a series of community-focused campaigns within cannabis that include the Garden Party, which is an educational event aiming to promote urban farming in hemp and cannabis cultivation, and Curvy Cannabis, which challenges anti-fat bias in cannabis-focused aesthetics and marketing. Jess Jackson, welcome to Madness Cafe.
Woo-hoo! Thanks for having me. Thank you.
It's so exciting because Raquel and I just had another episode where we talked about body image. And one of the things I got so upset about was, why do we think fat is so evil? Like, why do we say that? And one of the things I wanted to jump right in and ask you, on your Instagram, you say, "My nudity is activism." What does that mean?
Yeah. So I think that we've been socialized to fear diverse bodies or marginalized bodies. We only see a certain aesthetic in marketing, right? Even though plus size women make up 65% of the population, we're only included in 2% of the marketing. And so when you look at also our market share in the fashion industry, plus size brands, which have catapulted in online shopping, we're a $1 billion industry as well, right? Like, we make up a large proportion of the population, but you don't see us because we are taught that it's ugly, that it doesn't sell, that it's unhealthy. That's probably the biggest trope, that these are things that we should be ashamed of. We're the butt end of every joke. We're taught to be laughed at. And so when I launched my first entrepreneurial venture was an online boutique where I was selling clothing, and I had a business partner, and she wore the smallest size in our clothing line, and I wore the largest, and we were spectrum, right? Like, we talked about being a part of the spectrum. But my body, and I would follow like plus size models as inspiration to sell the clothing and all those things, but my body type was not represented. I didn't see myself. I saw plus size models which were still pretty much conforming to the normative figures, right? Having a smaller waist, larger hips, larger breasts, smaller belly, like no belly fat, but they were plus size, right? And so when I was doing a lot of that work, I wanted to show my body type in the hope that it would demonstrate to other people that we can all look beautiful who might share my body type, right? And one of the things that we see often are over-sexualized feminine figures, right? Like, women are often hypersexualized. My nudity is increasing the visibility in response to a lack of visibility, in response to contemporary discomfort, in response to asserting that I can take up space too. So when I say my nudity is activism, it is me being an activist and proponent of representation of larger bodies in media.
So just going back to the body image issue that Jennifer and I did not too long ago, we talk about how we, in varying degrees, she and I have internalized a lot of that fat phobia and fat shaming and shaming about diverse bodies and all that. How were you able to escape that? Or if you did internalize it at one time, what did you do to get away from that? Was it just following certain people on Instagram?
Yeah, I think that social media has played a large part in me just seeing beautiful fat bodies. Otherwise, we don't see it on, like, if I think about the media that I consumed as a child, as a fat child, right? I didn't
Yeah.
see fat people on TV. I was made fun of it for being fat at school. I didn't see fat people in the ads, in the magazines. Like, I didn't see them. It's just that we didn't exist, especially not unless we were like the butt end of a joke, right? So like there was never this positive depiction of someone in a larger body. And then when I went to the University of Michigan, I did a lot of social justice work. We did a lot of like identity exploration and understanding how our certain social identities have been historically marginalized and disenfranchised, while others have been historically centered. We learn to value and validate the ones that have been historically centered. And one of the processing activities was around body size. And it was that moment in college that I started to think about how my life and lived experience in a larger body shaped how I showed up in spaces, how I used my voice, how I ate my food in front of people, from how I walked and my pace of walk and what what I wore. Everything was shaped by how people would perceive me in a larger body, and it limited myself. And it has stifled, like, there are times that I'm a pretty engaging speaker. I like to speak to people, but there are times that I dim my light so people don't see me because I'm in a larger body and don't feel confident. I think I went through a lot of trauma. I had a pretty traumatic experience in my adult life about 3 years ago. I started to reclaim my power and my presence and my voice. And so when it comes to that process of unlearning the internalized hate that we have, it took a lot of healing practices for me. One, I'm going to Brazil in December. And I remember in college, when I studied abroad in Brazil, we went to a capoeira lesson. I stood on the sidelines because I was so ashamed of my body. I didn't even try. I'm so excited to go to Brazil and like try capoeira because I don't care what my body looks like to other people. I care that I can be present in my body and build strength and endurance, right? But it took a lot of putting myself in uncomfortable positions. I went to a sensual movement dance class. I modeled in campaigns. I wore lingerie in public. Like, it was a lot of things that made me confront myself with what my body actually is. And then a lot of private practices too, right? Like, how do you pour into yourself even when you might have, when I look in the mirror, there are times I still feel disgusted by my belly. I'm still uncomfortable with the way my belly looks.
Me too.
And
Me too.
it's
Same.
hard to unlearn.
Same.
It's hard to unlearn. And so I do a lot of things like in the mirror where I dance. I'll turn on music and I dance for like 20 minutes where I'm looking at how my body flows and how it moves, just so I can be more present and appreciative of how my body carries me. I never had fat friends. Like, that's one thing that I'm like learning is like, you were scared to be associated with fatness. You didn't want someone to call you out as the fat B word or like what, like that big fear. And so that meant that I was hanging out with people whose bodies was not like mine out of protection. But then that also created trauma because like I didn't get the girlfriend experience of like, let's go out, let me borrow your sweatshirt, because I could never fit my friend's clothes. I networked. I got close to folks who share my experience around my body size, right? Like Curvy Cannabis was a way to connect with folks who have larger bodies, and we talked and we shared that experience. I put myself in uncomfortable situations and forced myself out of my shell. And then I prioritized loving sacred space to get in tune with and comfortable with my body. That doesn't mean that this healing journey has stopped. I'm now so proud of my body and I can move through life. No, even getting on the camera today, I'm like, oh, I'm having a puffy cheek day. Like, I'm not, like there are things that I am still critical of. And it's just like recognizing how those things present themselves. And like, so what does it mean that you're having a chubby cheek day? Your voice is still strong. Your story is still strong. Like, reminding myself that like those are messages that have been stifling you. Don't stop your voice because of that.
So I have two things to say to that. Number one, don't ever dim your voice or yourself.
Yes.
Number two, I love your chubby cheeks. I think they're gorgeous.
Thank you.
They're beautiful. I have noticed as I age that my cheeks are losing some of that. And I'm like, oh, why didn't I appreciate that when I had it? It's attractive. It's youthful. So love on it. Love on it big time. Your second line, you said, vulnerability is resistance. How does that play in?
Man, I work in pretty corporate spaces. I do a lot of business consulting, and I think a lot of times, and I do a lot of DEI, right? Like a diversity, equity, and inclusion work, which is inherently human, right? Like we have to like name atrocious histories in order to overcome them and think about how we can overcome them. And yet it's completely countercultural to what we know as being high performing work environments, right? Like high performing work environments are somewhat robotic and
Yeah.
remove feeling and emotions. Like we're doing, you get this task done, move it forward. Come on, we're going to keep going. It doesn't matter if, hey, I'm a bottleneck right now because I'm having a mental breakdown, or there's something going on in the world and in my community that's distracting me. We have to keep flow. I just am uncomfortable perpetuating some of those cycles. And for me, I just would rather you be honest, transparent, and vulnerable about what you don't have capacity to do, what you do have capacity to do. How can we collaborate to one another? If I'm having a bad mental health week, I'll be transparent about that and vulnerable about that, because a lot of times there are folks who are hiding that as a part of themselves, and it's really affecting how they live. And so sometimes 2 years ago, I planned my suicide. Trigger warning, suicidal ideation is a part of my lived experience. And I wrote about it. And when I write about the anniversary of that day, there are so many people who come to me and like feel less alone because of me sharing my story. And I think that that human connection is like really what we need in today's day and age, when we're taught like just to keep going and get things done and not be human. We saw in the pandemic, when things were broken and things stopped, our mental health crises soared.
Right.
People were not able to keep going. Therapists no longer had appointments because they were fully booked.
That's true.
So how can we live a life that's more sustainable? And to me, that means being vulnerable, honest, and human.
I love that, Jess, that you bring all of that up, and the fact that you are honest and open about the struggles that you've had. I too have had suicidal ideations, and mine was 5 years ago. One of the things that stood out for me is you saying that it's a continuing process for you. It isn't just, hey, love my body today, everything's good, I never have to do this again. You're very honest about, hey, this is a continuing process for everybody. So I thank you.
And you have to
So-
put action and time behind it. One of the things that I know from my mental health journey is I can notice when I'm more triggered, right? Like, because there are things that contribute. There's stress, there's overwhelm, there's like chaos when things are disorganized and chaotic, there's relationship problems. Like all these things contribute to my overall mental well-being. And sometimes I don't pay attention to those triggers, right? Or what's going on in my body. But what I know is that there are activities or coping mechanisms that help me get through them. And so in order for me to do that, to apply the coping mechanism to get through them, I have to meditate every day in order to be in tune with where my mental health is. I have to dance in the mirror every day in order to feel confident in my body. I have to try something towards healthy eating, right? Like, and I talk about healthy eating because I feel my optimal best when I'm not putting things in my body that I'm allergic to, right? Because I'm lactose intolerant. So like me eating dairy is not good for me. And that depletes my energy. I don't talk about healthy eating from the perspective of weight loss, which I think is a problem in society. But I think about what's giving me the most energy to like feel good and get through my day. And when I'm not doing all of those things every day, then that's when I start getting into crisis mode. And so I think that we know and learn our coping mechanisms and our resources and our tools that work for us in our internal bodies, but are we actually committed to putting them into practice? It's hard sometimes because life gets carried away, but I try to at least do one thing for my mental health every day. Whether it be, I'm going to just take, some days it's a whole day. I'm going to take a self-care day and I'm doing a whole lot. Some days it's literally, did I write today and do a journal because that's all I have time for.
Jess, you said that some things trigger you and you can feel it. How do you physically feel it in your body when when you know you need to move into these nurturing practices for yourself? How do you physically feel it?
That's good. I feel it mostly in three places. I feel it in my gut. my gut is like my first responder. When I am having a lot of stomach aches, I know that there's something going on. What am I holding in my gut? I also feel it in my chest, in my heart. My anxiety sits a lot in my chest, and it sometimes feels constricting, like I can't breathe, right? And so that reminds me, like, hey, maybe you need to just sit and try to do some deep breaths, some box breathing, calm down. And then where I feel like my brain is the control box of all of that. Because
Yeah.
what I feel in my brain a lot of times are like negative self-talk, a lot of fear, a lot of doubt, a lot of like narratives that like don't even, sometimes it'll be like, that's not even true. I could say, Jennifer's mad at me. I just know she's mad at me, right? Like, I know she's mad at me. I did something wrong and I'm feeling guilty. Jennifer has never told me anything or even expressed that she was mad at me, but I'm over here perseverating on it. And so when my brain is in this like loop around something negative that then heightens my anxiety in my chest and kind of makes me sick to my stomach, what's going on?
Can you stop that thought process? Do you have a control for that?
It depends on the state of my mental health.
Yeah.
If I have been consistent with those coping mechanisms, I'm eating the nourishment that gives me, I've been practicing my meditation, I can be more aware of it and catch it and stop it sooner. If I have been avoidant in my self-care, which sometimes when you get busy and you, what I notice is I get so busy and I'm working constantly to distract myself from actually a lot of the emotional stuff that's going on. And sometimes it'll be months that I haven't paid attention to myself because I've just been distracting myself with work. When it finally comes to a halt and I reach the burnout state, that's going to be more crisis and going to take more time to get out. And so that's why I think the practice is so important to me, because I don't want to get to crisis mode.
I want to say that real loud for our listeners. Distracting ourselves with work. That has been huge for me.
It's crazy because crazy is not the right word, but it is
interesting.
It's ironic because the first time I went to therapy out of crisis response, and that was another thing, I wasn't in consistent therapy. I only went when I had a mental breakdown, and like that's not helpful either. You need to have consistent outlets to talk through what's going on. But the first time I went, I told my therapist that. They were like, well, how do you cope with these feelings? And I was like, I work a lot. And she was like, that's good, keep doing that. And I was like, that's the resource you're giving. I believed her. And I was like, this is like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep overworking myself. And then it doesn't turn out well. It doesn't end well in the end.
I hope you don't go to that same therapist anymore.
No. But I didn't even find it alarming. I used it to like validate bad habits after that. You're just coping. Keep going till 3 a.m. It's fine.
Yeah, that is not fine.
Not at all.
I would really love to hear about your love story.
With Cara. So Cara and I met the first year outside of college for me, and she was in Battle Creek and I was in Battle Creek. I was with the Michigan College Advising Corps, and I worked at Battle Creek Central as a college advisor. At that time, because this was 2011, which doesn't, I guess, feel like a long time, but it's a long time in terms of Michigan's progression to LGBT rights, especially on the west side of the state. So when I was there, it was not okay to be, I was easily read as gay. I had a short, like pretty masculine haircut that was also bright red. I wore men's clothing, so I was more masculine of center in my presentation. So it was easy to read that I was gay, which working in a school in Battle Creek, Michigan wasn't always a safe choice, but it was something visibility is resistance. Like I was like, there are queer kids here who are going to see that, hey, there's this queer person. But Cara had seen me because I was noticeable, right? She had seen me on her commute to work going into the high school. She'd seen me at the gym. And then there was, back in the day, it was kind of like a queer MySpace. And so she found me on that platform.
So visibility paid off.
Yeah, visibility paid off. It found me my wife. And she hit me up and we talked for a few months, and then we went to dinner, and then ever since that dinner, we have been attached at the hip. We have so many things in common, but we met in Battle Creek, and then we moved to St. Louis, where I did Teach for America. And then we moved to Delaware, where we were able to get legally married in private, because our family were going to be like, you get married with us. And then we got married in Michigan in 2017, and it was legal, and now we move home. And the climate towards LGBT folks in Michigan is really different than it was 10 years ago. So that has been nice. And I think my favorite part of our love story is probably our engagement story. I proposed to Cara in Paris, and I had gotten outside of the Moulin Rouge. So the first time, Cara is very
fluttered.
She's very family centric. Like, I always say she's loyal to a fault, because at any given moment, her family, if anything happens, she's like dropping anything she's doing to be there for them. So the first time that I met her family, we watched Moulin Rouge. And so I got her for her birthday tickets to Moulin Rouge. And then I had all of all of my friends and family make a little like piece of what their adventure with me had been. I got her family to make scrapbook pages with what their adventure with Cara had been. And then I made the last part about like our adventure together. And the last page was kind of like, will you marry me? Like, will you continue this adventure with me? So I proposed to her outside of Moulin Rouge using an adventure book from Up that I made. So it was like, that's probably my favorite part of our love story. She proposed too to me in Battle Creek, outside of the first place I told her I loved her.
That's so lovely.
We both have big couple goal envy right now. That's awesome.
Big time.
Word on the street is you had an amazing wedding.
Yeah, we got married. So Cara's degree is in wildlife conservation and ecology. And one of those adventures that we like to take is camping. And so we had a weekend camp getaway at a summer camp. What I really wanted, I had two big goals, was like for our friends and family, because we're one of the first out queer people in our families, to see that love is love, right? Like for them to experience a wedding and for them to feel the love that we have for each other. And two, for it to be fun and memorable. Those were like our big goals. And so we had first night with the rehearsal dinner, and we had a taco bar and bonfires and s'mores. And the next night was, we had a like camp breakfast, like, and then had our wedding outside around a bonfire. And then we had like yard games, life-size yard games, and we had a live performer. It was like a full experience. It's what kind of has informed Copperhouse, because I was like, this is that and our proposal, because when we were in Paris and Amsterdam and London, which is where that Europe trip, we stayed in Airbnbs. But the desire for like a rustic feeling and charming bed and breakfast or bed and breakfast stems from like our wedding experience and what it was like to be able to hold space for our friends and family in love. That's kind of what we try to do in our experience design at Copperhouse too.
And just for the audience, what is Copperhouse?
Oh, Copperhouse is it's the bud and breakfast in Detroit. We're the first bud and breakfast in Detroit. Yeah. So we're a cannabis-positive B&B. So we get overnight guests, we get intimate party and intimate dinner bookings, and we do a lot of content production, like lifestyle content. We just had a video shoot yesterday, shooting a commercial. So we started as a prototype. I really wanted to be in the cannabis industry. One, being an entrepreneur in the cannabis industry, there's a high barrier to access. It's really expensive. The regulated industry is very expensive. And two, I was also a mid-level. I had an MBA. I was mid-level in my career, and like a lot of the industry roles were like who you know. And so I was gonna have to start from the bottom in a job I couldn't afford to take. So I started doing what I could with what I had, and we opened up our home to see how this would work. And I've met so many people in my living room. It's been amazing.
So what was the draw for the cannabis industry for you?
There are like three big. One, everything that I do has a pillar of justice, right? My core value is justice. And so when I notice opportunities to create more just outcomes, I'm all in. like whether it be education, whether it be work environments, whether it be in full-on industry. Black and brown communities have been disproportionately criminalized for cannabis since the beginning. In fact, the reason why we even have cannabis prohibition is rooted in racist propaganda. So when we think about the wrongs of this industry, a lot of it falls on my community. And so I view the industry as an opportunity to right some of those wrongs and repair the harm, especially given that in Michigan alone, it's projected that it'll be valued at $3 billion. And by 2025, we're looking at like $30 billion nationwide, right? So there's a lot of money to be made in this industry. And there is jargon within the industry called social equity, which is there's already a consideration. I'm not saying that the considerations are always adequate or even targeted at the appropriate outcomes, but there is already a consciousness to the fact that there has been disproportionate harm. So you don't have to like build that consciousness, which you have to do in a lot of other industries. Like banking has the same exploitative like history on community, and we don't talk about that. Yep. So you have to even build that consciousness. So that was exciting to me, was the opportunity to create justice and repair harm in a field that is making money, right? Because education, right, you're always going to be fighting for money, even if you're doing things. Then the second thing is my sorority sister I was in my last semester in my MBA program, and my sorority sister launched her brand called Apothecary, which is she has a son, and it's like a high-end carrying case for your cannabis that has a lock, and it's a humidor, so it keeps your flower at the right humidity. Wow. And so she was promoting her product line, and a part of her marketing campaign was sharing her story as a mother who was using cannabis to treat her anxiety, right? She was in TV in LA. And so she had a high stress job, and she was using this, but she wanted to like keep her kids safe, so that's why she developed her product. And her story really inspired me to think about how I had stigmatized cannabis use when it's really helping people. And a lot of that stigma that I have, that social stigma, is actually stemming from the propaganda that has been used against my people, right? So I started to do some of that unlearning around what does it mean just to value a plant for what it is and what it offers. And I started doing my own education. Well, remember when I talk about I feel it in my gut, I actually have IBS. Cannabis can be used as a pain management system for IBS, in addition to the therapeutic benefits for the anxiety in my chest. And it's more natural and more holistic. And so I had all these stigmas when really my body has an endocannabinoid system that tells me that this natural medicine is actually better for me. Me being the critically conscious person that I am now, on top of it being aimed towards justice, now I'm like, I've been taught everything is a lie. Everything about this is a lie. So then I had inspiration there. And then just in my apprenticeship, like in my last semester, we had to do kind of a capstone project where you kind of talk about like the industry and what type of jobs you'd like to do. For my capstone project, I looked into the cannabis industry, and Cara also is in green industries, right? She has a degree in conservation. And so we both kind of jokingly it was on the ballot the year we wanted to move home. We're like, well, if this passes, this happens, like we can do it, we can go for it. And we moved home in 2018. It passed in December of 2018, and we opened our doors and had our first booking January 11th, 2019.
I'm so glad you talk about this, because I feel like I have some of that programming that pot is bad or weed is bad, or you hear all these stories, and I do think it's the propaganda. I also feel very strongly about the natural world, and somehow my head says, yeah, but pot's not part of that. And I don't know why that is. That doesn't logically make any sense. Do you feel that the cannabis industry in Detroit is going to be sustainable for small businesses, or do you feel it's something that, I don't know a better, nicer way to say this, that the big, rich white men corporations are going to come in and try and take that massive amount of money that you're talking about?
That's the problem, right? Well, I will say your stigma towards the plant is not your own choosing. You have been taught that since the DARE programs in school. Like all of we've been trained to view this plant as harmful. Even if you don't want the psychoactive effects, right? Like the feeling of being high, there are ways to consume cannabis that you can get the medicinal properties without that, but we aren't taught that, right? Like we just think it's all bad. So you're not alone in that thought process. Yes, I think that there are so many costly barriers of entry. It limits the potential of smaller businesses to enter and to compete. So I think that one of the projects that it's gonna be about positioning your brand and building your niche the same way with any, like, support local, like folks that are conscious consumers. If we really want smaller businesses to be able to compete, there are two ways that I think. One, social equity opportunities, right, where larger businesses are reinvesting some of their profits into smaller businesses. And two, really, really cultivating a niche market of conscious consumers that want to make the choice to shop these smaller businesses. So I am working on, because I see, like, it's so hard to get a license within this industry, because one, the regulations change every other day. Two, it costs $6,000 just to apply to a license.
No.
Just to apply, it's $6,000. And then depending on the license type, there are some that cost $40,000, some that cost $1,000. But those are the types of, and then for some of them, you have to prove certain capitalization, and some of the capitalization is like $250,000 or $500,000. So you have to have some business savvy even to navigate those regulations. So when I think about equity and I think about justice, I'm not thinking about people like me. Like, I don't have money, right? Like, I don't have capitalization, but I have an MBA. I have the skills to be able to, like, network and build the resources that I need. I'm pre-qualified for my licensure. I'm on the path to getting there. But what about folks like my brother or my cousin who might not have that same business acumen, but have desire to enter and have a business? So I'm working on a worker-owned cooperative to ensure that regular people who want to have equity in this industry can have a pathway to do that. And then we can retain the equity for some of our industry in our community. So I'm working on that. And I think that will build a niche of folks who want to support cooperative, worker-owned cooperatives, right? And who want to be conscious about where their dollars go. But I think just like in any industry, you'll have to compete with the larger folks who monopolize the market.
Right.
And that's going to be hard unless you build out your niche. How are you differentiating yourself in the marketplace?
Please keep us posted on the collaborative sort of collective that you're trying to work on to help other people, because that's important. I mean, these barriers to entry are disgusting, for lack of a better word. $6,000 for an application, that's ridiculous.
It's same with farmland, Raquel. People who want to buy land to farm in Michigan, and probably other states, but I only know about Michigan, come up against the exact same thing.
It's ridiculous. That literally is
Raquel, it's big business.
I know, but it makes me sick. It just makes me sick.
It's capitalism. We live in capitalism. And that it's sickening. I feel that in my gut too. So I'm always thinking about how can we operate within this structure. That's kind of, honestly,
we gotta end the structure.
But how?
I don't know. I don't know.
I have to win within it, Jennifer. I just have to win within it.
Yeah, I guess there is something to that, win within it. But at the same point, if you look at history, that's why they keep changing the rules, because you get a win and then the rule changes, and they knew the rule was going to change, but we didn't know the rule was going to change. So we got to refocus everything and then come out again to maybe get a small win. It's just, I'm not saying give up. I'm not. But I just, Raquel's right. I want to punch it down.
It's hard. I do. That's what I do every day, to try and dismantle systems from within. I know that that's not a strategy that wins all the time, but to me, That's the only strategy. How else do I get the dollars to redistribute? Like, really, it's about an imbalance of where money is in our society, right? Like, we've extracted through hostage labor, right? Like, we have extracted from communities over time to build big business. And there is this much over here and this much over here, and they need to give some back. And that's like the only way to, like, the way that I sleep at night is all I can do is help people see.
My ex-husband and I were talking about this today because we went to my daughter's pop-up in Ann Arbor, and we were talking about Biden as president, and we got into this discussion about how it's exactly the same. And I said, well, actually my husband said, he said, Trump was different because he was a rule breaker. He wasn't the same as all of these politicians. The hard part, though, was Trump was ugly. Like, he had all these awful ideas and awful dreams, and he's basically walking ego and sick, unhappy man. But if we got a rule breaker of the same caliber who had a heart of love and pushed the docket in that same way, refused to play the game in that same way, but they were coming from a better source, maybe we could have some change.
I believe in love. I believe in the transformative power of love. That's the name of my TED Talk. I think that's my guiding light. Is this coming from love? Can it come from love? Or is it coming from ego? And like, that's how I evaluate my actions, my behaviors, and my choices.
Right. Got to remember that. Right.
I want to go back to something that you said really quick, Jess, before we move away from it too much. Jess, you talked about finding local businesses that are purveyors of cannabis and, sort of keeping the funds in your community. I don't live in Michigan anymore. I live in Georgia. How do you, and, we have listeners who are from all over. How do people go about finding local cannabis, distilleries or growers or apothecaries or however, like what are some ways they can keep the funds in their own community?
That's a good question. I would start with, what's your legislation, right? Like, because it's federally illegal and not all states have adopted the legalization of cannabis. So let's say, is it in Georgia? It's not, right? Like, you're not going to be able to get cannabis. You can get CBD. Look into, once you know your legislation, then you know what you can get. And then I would look into the community. I use a lot of social media. So social media is my way of, like, I look into cannabis community, cannabis culture as hashtags. And then based off of what businesses you find in that search and what you're looking for, really look at who are the funders, who's investing in this organization. Even if you support a larger corporation, what are they doing with profits? Do they have a community impact brand, right? Some brands have a certain product line that's redistributing money into community. And so, like, if that is the case, like, are you still aligned there? And I would really look into social equity. What are they doing for social equity? In fact, there's a brand called Cannabis-positive, which is all about increasing inclusion in the cannabis industry. And they have something called the accountability list. And the accountability list just kind of features all of the brands and businesses who have been upholding their end of the bargain when it comes to social equity promises. So you'll see, like, what types of businesses are actually doing good work. And that might be another good place to start.
Okay. All right. Great. So just because I'm curious, when did cannabis become legal in Michigan?
So medicinal, the MMMP, Michigan Medical Marijuana Program, started in 2010. And we had a caregiver pathway. And then we passed recreational or adult use cannabis in 2019. So we are actually, I believe, for medical, number 2 or 3 in the nation in terms of our sales. Like, people in Michigan love weed. We have a pretty good market in terms of what it's developed on the medical side of the house. Recreational is still growing. A lot of our municipalities have opted out, and we're still getting better there.
One thing that always is upsetting for me, and you've touched on this, like we were saying before, it's capitalism, it's old white men, it's they're making money when there's all these people who look like us who are sitting in jail because of it. And that is a horribly, horribly heartbreaking and maddening and frustrating fact of all of this. To add on to that, there's I'm basically preaching right now, so I'll stop soon. I promise. The fact that there's the barriers to entry are so high that it just talk about having something heavy sitting on your chest. I get that, because that's exactly how I start to feel when I really, really start to go down the rabbit hole of thinking about all of this. So the fact that you are doing the work that you're doing and you're tackling the social justice part of it as well, my hat is off to you for that. So thank you for that work that you're doing.
Thank you, Raquel.
I really appreciate that.
I feel your pain. I feel it.
One other thing that I want to touch on, you talked a little bit, because we started with body positivity, and you mentioned curvy cannabis and how that helped you in your journey of feeling better about yourself, about feeling better about your body, and having a body that's not in the mainstream. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's a good nexus of all of the things that you seem to care about.
The first time that I'd ever worn lingerie was at the Curvy Cannabis Boudoir photo shoot. I had felt confident enough in my body to feel sexy in a piece of lingerie. And I remember for me, I was standing and I was wearing a teddy, and my armpit fat was kind of hanging over the edge of the teddy. And I was looking in the mirror and I was like, man, I would be so okay in this if I didn't have this here. And I was squeezing it and poking it. And then someone else who was in the room, she was wearing a bralette, and she came up and was like, I don't have that. So her body didn't have an armpit fat, but she had I don't know the name.
The wings.
The wings. She had wings, and she was like, but I really would like to get rid of these parts of my arm. And then other people, like, we all had our own insecurities about our body. No matter if I was looking at her, I was like, I wish that I was defined the way that you were and tight in these areas. And I would want that, but she still was able to poke. And so at the end of the day, we're just taught through capitalism to poke holes in ourselves so that we can do whatever we need to do to fix it. And really, the fixing needs to happen in here, in here, and in here. I think that was probably the most transformative experience for me, because it made me realize that I'm not the only one who's poking holes in myself. And then it became a critical conscious issue of like, y'all are teaching us to hate these parts of ourselves and profiting off of that hate. So how can we continue to formulate community where we're talking through what it feels like to have those holes poked in us all the time, and recover and continue? And because it's never ending, right? Like, I left the room, I might have felt the most confident in my body, but then 2 minutes later I hear a fat joke. Like, there's always that chatter and that noise that's going to bring me back to this hating of myself. But I need the space to protect me and guard me, and a lot of times that's found in community.
I love that. The fact that you do the work and you surround yourself with people who bolster the work that you've done. I think that's fantastic. And I think that's a really good message. Yeah, do your work, especially for people who've had or still have issues with anxiety or depression or loneliness or any number of other things. Find your community.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jess, is there anything that we didn't ask you about that you want to talk about, or maybe something that you want to go into more detail about?
I think we talked about healing and cannabis and starting a business and love. I think those are pretty, like, It's pretty much injustice. One of the things I do, and it comes from this feeling that vulnerability is a form of resistance.
Mhm.
I think that a lot of what I do is counter-cultural. I am a
Mhm.
leading speaker in the corporate training environment nationally. I speak on stages. I also have naked photos of me on Instagram, right? I
Mhm.
think a lot of the risk that I take takes courage and a
Yes.
lot of unlearning of where the fear comes from. And so I remember
Mhm.
not seeing myself represented when I was selling clothing online and feeling like I just want to like I just want to show folks what real bodies can also look like, uh,
Yeah.
but never having enough courage to put myself out there or do that. And so I think one thing I would challenge folks to recognize is that to create change within a system that has been ongoing, at least in the US context, for 400 years, over 400 years,
Yeah.
right? You
Mhm.
have to be brave. You have to take risk. And sometimes those risks are going to make people feel uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And sometimes they might get you fired. I got fired from a executive level position for my interest in cannabis.
Mm.
You have to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And so that would be my, like, if you can't do it out of fear, get some courage.
That's huge. You saying all of this is going to land for somebody, and just more than just one somebody. The messages that you are delivering are going to help so many people feel whatever it is that they need to feel to make whatever their next move is. I mean, keep doing what you're doing. Thank you for letting us help you get that message out to more people.
Okay.
So what's on the horizon for you and for Copperhouse and Loud.social, or something that we haven't even talked about? Like, what's next? Like, what can we keep our eye out for when it comes to all the great work that you're doing?
Well, I authored a curriculum for cultivating racial equity in the workplace that's being distributed on Open Sesame, Udemy, and Cyber Youth through Torrance Learning. So that's really exciting.
Nice.
That curriculum has been able to touch estimated 100,000 people based off of clients and distribution points, which is really exciting. I officially transitioned to be an independent contractor in my full-time employment. So I can continue to build out some of my projects full time. And that means in January of 2022, Copperhouse, we've been working on our basement expansion, our basement remodel. It's 1,000 square foot studio apartment, and that's going to be relaunching in January. And so that's also exciting because we'll have a larger space and a space that's kind of separate from our home. And Loud Social is moving, pivoting our offering, which is exciting because we've been doing a lot of social media content production. And what we realize is we're the community engagers. Like, we're the folks
Mhm.
that are able to bridge between organizations and community. And so thinking about what that looks like and what we're offering from that line, and also focusing on launching a product line. So there are lots of things in the works right now. They excited for is a merchandise line that's going to support the Legacy Co., which is the worker-owned cooperative. We're going to start a Detroit royalty merchandise
Love
line. So we're
that.
excited for that.
Please keep us posted on that. That's so cool. One last question, because you're busy. I know you are, and we want to be respectful of your time. So one last question for you. What makes the work that you do feminist?
Yeah, I think that everything that I do is centered on women. Everything from the space that we cultivate in Copperhouse to the programming that we put on with Loud Social to how we ensure that Curvy Cannabis centers on women who are not typically seen. My whole core is to ensure that voices, femme voices specifically, are heard and amplified and seen. I would say that the other way that the work that I'm queer. And so a lot of my political ideology and how I navigate in the world is also queer, which is rooted in feminist theory. And I'm an intersectional feminist, so I recognize how different aspects of our identity affect our lived experience.
Jess, thank you again for being with us and sharing about all of the work that you do, both professional and personal and out in society. And we wish you all the success in everything that you have coming up.
Awesome.
Thank you for
Thank
being
you
with
so
us.
much.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks everyone for listening today. We will be back with more Madness Cafe next week. You can find us on Instagram at Madness Cafe Podcast or email us at madnesscafepodcast@gmail.com. Bye.